Thank you for watching Fireside. If you enjoyed this podcast, consider liking and subscribing to be notified when future episodes release. Enjoy. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Fireside. Following up last episode's legendary guest, we have yet another legend with us today. In the old school community, he is known as someone who first started making content more than 15 years ago with, believe it or not, luring videos, to now being a mainstay within the general PvP scene, doing everything from challenges to hardcore restricted series, and most recently, creating a conversation surrounding the greater PvP space and its broader issues. Welcome, Framed, to Fireside.
Thanks for having me. What a way to open that up, man. Gotta
Always.
bring up the luring when I
Listen.
was 17.
You were 17
Yeah.
for those videos? 15 years ago?
Yeah, maybe even like, 15 years ago? Yeah, I would have been like 16, 17.
I was watching some of your old content just to familiarize myself where we all began, because I had a conversation with Soup a couple of weeks ago of like the oldest content creators within this space, like people who've been making videos for over a decade now, and he brought your name up. So I'm like, okay, I got to check it out. And yeah, those videos are absolutely hilarious. I love that.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, we've known each other, him and I, since like 2011. So we have known each other basically for the existence of, even predates old school, in fact.
Did you guys meet like in game, or did you guys know each other out of the game as like friends?
We actually met through Goody, who, I think because I met him first. I met Goody first, and then Goody introduced me to Soup. So that was like, again, I think all around like 2011. None of us have ever met. Well, actually, we haven't met in real life. That's a lie, but that's not how we met initially. Like we've, since been friends and gone to like IRL events and like hangouts and like vacations and stuff together. But yeah, we did meet entirely through RuneScape.
That's super cool. I mean, yeah, I can definitely relate. I've my best buddy is my group Ironman partner, and I met him through World of Warcraft, so I can totally understand where that's coming from. Although he's not a content creator, just a good buddy. That's awesome to hear. So I know today we really wanted to hone in on a specific topic, something that I think you obviously have a vested interest in, and me, I just like talking about this stuff, and it's a very interesting topic to kind of broach as someone from a little bit more on the outside. And that topic is PvP and its many issues and possibly some solutions maybe that we can create a conversation around. So to just start us off, can you just quickly summarize what you feel is the core problem with PvP right now? Like what is happening with this scene that you feel is like a detriment to it?
It's such a broad topic. I don't know if I would be able to even do it justice in trying to just summarize it. But because there's just so many angles to look at it. I guess like the first place to start is PvP updates have not really been like a main staple of old school RuneScape, I would say. Like it started off where PvP was, I'm not going to say just as important as the rest of the game, but there was a lot less focus on Iron Man and things like like raids, all these different raids updates and like all these different new bosses and everything and all these different new mechanics. I would say it was a lot more evenly distributed in terms of where attention went to development time, because there was at least some sort of effort back in the day to make PvP just as important in RuneScape as every other element. But like as time has gone on, I would say it's become way less relevant, way less important to Jagex as a company, way less important to the community as a whole. And whether that be for there's like a myriad of reasons why that could be, but I guess it's really kind of hard to pinpoint it, really, other than like maybe there's just not enough updates to keep that sort of scene going. But it's not really a relevant thing anymore. Like there's just no updates to it. There's no way to learn it for players that do want to get into it. There is a lot more annoying aspects of PvP in today's day and age than interesting aspects. Well, actually, maybe that's an over an over exaggeration, but like what I kind of mean by that is like a perfect example is a lot of people that go to the wilderness these days, because I think it's like 95% of the player base will not engage with PvP in any meaningful way. And then the other 5%, obviously, basically the main thing they do is PvP. But in that 95%, like a large majority of them, the only reason why they would be going to the wilderness is if they're doing something like trying to get their Major Arena 1, Major Arena 2 cape. If, maybe they're an Iron Man and they're trying to get like a Dragon Pickaxe, or if they're trying to get a Void Waker, or a lot of players, if they're just going into the wilderness and they just want to do a clue step and then they end up getting PK'd. Like there's a lot more room for annoying occurrences to happen with people that don't have any interest in PvP whatsoever. And, it's just creating a very contentious, I can't find the word. It's just contentious in general. The topic of PvP is a very debated thing, and a lot of players, the vast majority, do not like the way that the PvP currently is in the game, and it's a real problem for not just them, but obviously for the actual PKers themselves. There's no real room for growth if the majority of people that are talking about PvP don't want to engage in it, and they are going to, by default, vote no because they're voting against their own best interest.
100%. And just to quickly clarify, when you say like back in the old day, you're still referring to old school RuneScape. You're just referring to like 2014, 2015 old school RuneScape?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. I'm because obviously there is like a whole history of, in pre-EOC. I would say like PvP was like the hot thing from like 2004 to basically like 2009, 2010. And then, maybe it did start to go down a little bit, but it was still obviously very relevant and popular in 2011.
Yeah,
But I mainly am talking about old school.
it feels like the marketing for old school originally was in major part its PvP scene, because it kind of died after EOC came out in like late 2012. And to my knowledge, it was just completely just destroyed. Like EOC destroyed PvP. And to this day, I mean, in RuneScape 3, the wilderness is a non-hostile zone. You can just switch off PvP there and do most of your stuff just like fine. It's not really a PvP area anymore. The PvP scene just straight up doesn't exist in that game in any meaningful capacity. So when OSRS was coming out, that was like a big like, hey guys, remember when PvP existed? Come join OSRS and check it out again. And there was definitely that like pull from that community. So I can imagine it being very vibrant when it first launched, and eventually something shifted, and it was an unconscious change, maybe in the player base, in the development cycle, noticing maybe what players prefer, what they don't. There was a conscious, as you pointed out, pivot away from explicitly PvP-centric content. And I wonder how much of that has to do with just the way people play games now has just kind of changed a little bit. Do you feel like that maybe that's part of the reason?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many different aspects to why it could be an issue. I really do think trying to sit there and pinpoint exactly what the problem is almost an impossible task, because I think there's just so many contributing factors as to why something, like PvP is not anywhere near as popular anymore. I think like one big aspect of it, potentially could be that risk in old school RuneScape. There was basically there's not been risk since I don't remember the exact time, but maybe like 2015 or whatever. Basically back in like 2015 or somewhere thereabouts, when the servers were constantly being hit offline, people were dying, and then they would just lose all their items because it was the old death mechanics. Like you would basically keep the 3 items that you have on you, and you had 1 minute to get back before it was visible to everybody else, and then another minute before it completely despawned. So there was like a 2-minute window back in the day to go and get your stuff back. And that was like a huge part of the identity of RuneScape, is like there was no gravestones, there was nothing like that. And basically if you died, you always risked your items. That was just kind of like a part of the game. But eventually, the like a gravestone system came into the game. It was kind of like a weakish sort of thing in terms of like you would die and then you would have like an hour to go back and your stuff was just on the ground. It wasn't in actually any sort of gravestone, but it was like effectively like a gravestone, right? And,
Yeah.
and they did this because at least from memory, they did this because again the servers were just being hit off constantly all the time. They had so many connection issues from people just constantly DDoSing it that it was basically like a necessity to add something like that into the game. And after that happened, and they finally dealt with the DDoS attacks, they just never ended up reverting it. So that could have been, one of the many factors as to why, a risk kind of became a lesser thing in this game.
Mhm.
But as time goes on, or as time went on, rather from there was just less and less risky things, and there was just less risk in general in old school RuneScape, and the only place that still existed, as it did back in the day, is the wilderness. So, you have this whole player base that kind of grew up with the game. They all know it, and even if it's an annoying aspect, they kind of know that it's part of it. But then I would say too that there was a definite shift when all of the World of Warcraft players came over. What, that was like a couple years now, because you came with that wave, right?
I would
Like,
say, like, not to sidetrack too much, it was like the original couple content creators from the WoW scene, or like Caradis. I would say maybe I'm
mhm,
involved in that like 2 years ago. I started playing the
yeah,
game like a little bit under 2 years ago. And then it was like Mad Season, but then like the really, really big influx that we saw of like, Guzu, Savix, Sardako, and all that, that was like 8 months ago.
yeah. Wow, really?
Yeah,
It
I
just
know,
felt like
right?
it's been so much
It's
longer,
so
but
long, I know, right?
yeah. But yeah, like I don't know exactly where it was said, so I'm gonna like tread a bit lightly when I quote this, but like for the past maybe like 3-4 years, whatever it is, a lot of players that are coming into old school RuneScape are playing it for the first time.
Yeah.
So they don't have any sort of, nostalgia attached to how the game used to be back, in 2004 to 2011, or even for old school RuneScape from like 2013 to now. They don't really understand how it is. And to be fair, there's no obligation for them to understand. Why should they? If they're playing a new game, you don't need to understand the history of a game before playing it, because obviously that's a bit ridiculous. But point being is, they come in, they understand that the death mechanics are as simple as, oh well, if I die, I can go back and I pay a small fee to recover my items from gravestone. It's not that big of a deal. But then if I go into the wilderness, my gravestone is not a thing. I actually lose all the items on me. So maybe they learn that lesson, and they brought all their items, maybe some untradables or whatever. They die, they lose, even if it's just like a couple mil, or even if it's just like a couple 100K, whatever it might be. That is an annoying negative experience. And immediately they're like, I don't like that place. Why would I ever want to go back into that place? And then eventually maybe find out, oh, to get my best in slot magic cape, I have to go into that place and I have to go spend like 30 minutes to an hour or whatever it is in that place. Like, no, screw that. And it's one of those things where it's like they basically at the moment they have to suck it up and just go and do it, but that doesn't mean they're going to like it, right?
Yeah.
And I feel as though there is like that sentiment in general is kind of the mindset that has taken over, and like because that used to be like something that was around, that mindset was around still even at the beginning of old school RuneScape for however many years, but like every time something like that was brought up, like a good portion of people just said, "Get over it. It's the wilderness," and that was like kind of like the popular response. Whereas nowadays the response is, "Yeah, like I hate the wilderness. I don't like PvP. I'm always going to vote no to it. Like everyone that PKs is just annoying. And again, I think that regardless of whether or not that is the correct opinion or if that is a valid opinion, that is the popular opinion. And again, you can understand exactly why someone would have that opinion, right?
Yeah.
But like a lot of people are going to, people are going to not want to ever vote against their own best interest. And if that's something that is a selling point of old school RuneScape, that you vote what you want in the game, you kind of have given the reins over to the player base. A lot of people are going to feel like pretty emboldened to say, I don't like that, and my vote has a say. So something like PvP and something like the Wilderness, by default, it's going to be a much more contentious thing, and people aren't going to want to interact with it in any sort of way because that's kind of how the game is made in today's day and age.
Yeah. I know I agree with what you're saying. So it seems like, to summarize real quick, it's kind of like the game at one point, 2014, 2015, was overall perceived as risky. So the barrier to when you the ditch, let's say the wilderness ditch, when you jump over it, that amount of risk doesn't necessarily change as drastically. Whereas today, because the rest of the game is so much more comparatively safe, jumping over that wilderness ditch is a much bigger demand. It's like, oh my god, holy shit, like I am gonna lose everything if I die. This sucks. And it's like a bigger psychological pressure to avoid that, because you don't want to. You're so used to not having that risk elsewhere. And I definitely agree with that.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
Simultaneously, like obviously the less risk involved in the rest of the game has allowed Jagex to, for example, like reinvest into like bossing content that is a bit more challenging, a bit more mechanically demanding, because obviously like doing a Doom, Delve 16 or something is going to be a lot less tenable if you lose your entire like Blorva when you die or something. But simultaneously, obviously you don't bring Blorva to Doom, but people listening understand what I'm saying. So it's like it would be much more challenging to develop a difficult, high skill ceiling, rewarding PVM space without a lesser risk or lesser death cost. Simultaneously, that has the detriment of negatively impacting PvP in many ways as well, which I totally agree with that. And I think bridging that gap in some way is part of the conversation we'll have today. So having a safer game overall is kind of point number one, right? And as a result of that, having a more risk-averse player base. And then on top of all of that, you have kind of some of the topics I've touched on in some of my videos, which is like huge skill ceiling, huge learning curve, mixed with very unintuitive mechanics. The game outside of PvP has become more intuitive. The boss fights in like TOA are a lot more intuitive than anything in Cox, right? Or anything even before that. Just you know what's happening much easier. And in PvP, that not only has that not changed, the mechanics of PvP haven't like become easier to understand. In many ways, they've become way more challenging to process because the skill ceiling has raised even higher since the 2014, 2015 era. Is that a fair summary of everything?
Absolutely. Well, that's
Okay.
100% correct.
That's great. So I'm glad that we're on the same topic there. And we can just start off like off the rip of incentives, right? Like, why are people so risk averse to PvP or just to the wilderness in general? And in many ways, that's because they lose their stuff, but also because in some ways they feel pressured to engage with it in scenarios where they otherwise wouldn't. But I think Jagex and the player base as well is at least implicitly understanding that if people didn't have an incentive to do wilderness stuff, it would be even more dead. You know what I mean? Like it would be even more. So it's like, how do we balance the incentives of PvP, the wilderness bosses, maybe clue scrolls, although I don't like those at all. Or like, some magic cape, things like that, the bone altar being a boner, like all that kind of stuff is really, really important to having people in the wilderness and to keep it alive, but simultaneously creates a really negative feedback loop. What's the balance in your eyes? Can that ever be balanced?
So I think in general, PvP and the wilderness, it's just such a contentious topic that I don't think you're ever going to make the vast majority of people happy because there's so many different opinions on it. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try. But like I personally have been talking about PvP because I've PK'd for the entirety of old school RuneScape and before that, and it's always something that I've absolutely loved. I've obviously gotten big PKs. I've died and lost a lot in the wilderness. I've basically experienced like the full range of emotions that you can get from PvP, and it's again, to me, it's one of the most fun aspects of this game. But a lot of people that have never really engaged with it or used to engage with it back in the day and maybe want to try now, they don't, kind of like you said, it's a lot harder to engage with it these days because that gap between a new player and an experienced player is so large. So again, how do you go about doing something? How do you go about getting an update that everyone's going to be happy with, where the PKers are like, yeah, that's great. I love that more content is coming into the wilderness. And then you get the other players, which, this would be the 95% of the player base who would basically be seen as cannon fodder, going out and being like, well, you know what? I know that I'm going to die doing this new thing in the wilderness, but it's so worth it to me that I don't even care. The money is so good. It's so easy. You really do have to find an update that is going to make both parties happy. But the thing is, like the thing about it is compromise, right? Like I don't think compromise is really an easy thing for either player base or either side of the player base, because you have PvPers on one hand, which like have not gotten any significant updates. I would say Bounty Hunter was a really significant update in 2023. Again, same year in 2023, we had the Wilderness Boss rework and the Void Waker came into the game. But other than that, I would say there's really not many updates to the Wilderness whatsoever. Again, Major Arena 2 Cape as well. But like PvPers have basically been begging for updates for so many years that I would imagine at this point, and this is kind of where I'm at, that they would just take anything. But there are the diehard PKers that are sitting there like, no, I don't want to compromise on anything. We haven't gotten a solid actual update in years, right? But the other side of that is you're never going to get an update into the game if you can't make the 95% of players that are going to go into the wilderness, or trying to at least be incentivized to go into the wilderness, if you're not at least working with them, compromising with them in some way, shape, or form. So at this point, even though I'm sure this is, a very, controversial idea, I would say that one of the ways forward that you could go, maybe it's not the way forward, but one of the ways forward that you could go to actually get updates in the wilderness would be kind of like you discussed, making it so you don't always have to go to the wilderness to get the new items that come in. So a good example of an item that Jagex has already done this with, and they actually did it with the 2023 boss rework, is the Dragon Pickaxe. Since the Dragon Pickaxe used to be only achievable by killing bosses in the wilderness. That's the only place you would be able to get the Dragon Pickaxe. But with that update, they actually made it so you can get it from the Calphite Queen, albeit at a much more rare drop rate. I think it's like a 1 in 400 from the Calphite Queen, and it's still the best way to get the Dragon Pickaxe based on time investment by going into the wilderness. But that was kind of, I think, like their middle ground to kind of appease both groups of, like there's so much money that you can make from all these different wilderness bosses. But if you really only want the one unique item, the Dragon Pickaxe, you don't have to be here. You can just go outside of it. I think if there is a way forward, that's probably going to be the way forward. Maybe not. Maybe there is another way to, make it so an update would come into the game that a lot of PKers would like, and then the other 95% of the player base would be fine with. But I just don't realistically see that, because the general topic around PvP by most people is that they don't want to engage in it whatsoever. So making something, or making any new content in mind, trying to get them to engage in it, or basically quote unquote forcing them to engage with it because you release a new item, it's just not going to pass, in my opinion. I think the way forward is compromise.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at right now too. And I can speak just from my own experience as well. When I first started playing the game, as many irons do, I did go into the wilderness, not just for the hard clue scroll steps, but also to farm like Calvarion, to try to get the pickaxes, because obviously as a mid game player, not doing Caliphite Queen for anything, like you are going Calvarion, you're hitting him for a while, maybe getting a Void Waker piece if you're lucky, and the supplies are crazy. And of course, it was this really, it's kind of a negative feedback loop, right? You're there for this thing and it's getting interrupted. I was also simultaneously kind of frustrated because I'm like, especially at that point in the game, the Titans didn't exist and all this. So I'm like, here's 3, especially Calvarion, great mid-game bosses that are, at least at that time, I was like, they're wasted on the wilderness, because they're wasted on you constantly feeling annoyed if you get ganked. So I was like annoyed at it, right? That was that negative relationship that a lot of players have with the wilderness. I was in that, right? Nowadays, I'm a little bit more amicable to it, where I'm like, I want the wilderness to succeed. I see so much value in having an element like the wilderness in the game with an active PvP scene, and still incentives to go there for more players too. I like an example here, if we were touching on wilderness bosses for a moment, humor me if you will, is the idea of having like these 3 bosses in the wilderness that have really juiced tables. I think that's a great incentive, right? Like, I don't like the Void Waker on those bosses at all. Like, I just straight up do not, I still don't like that. I think it's bad. I don't like that it's a good PvP weapon and like one of the best spec weapons for PvE. So you do have to go get that if you're an Iron Man, which that's a separate but kind of connected issue there, where like the people that are grinding the Void Waker in the wilderness are Iron Men, and Iron Men are specifically not allowed to engage in PvP in any fruitful way. So whenever you're getting ganked as an Iron Man, it feels like 10 times worse than as a main.
Yeah.
Because as a main, if you fight back and you get the KO on them or like whatever, it's like a fucking sick moment. But as an Iron Man, it's like, well, now my time and resources are still wasted, regardless if I kill that person or not. Maybe my ego feels better, so I just have to run away. So the people that are in the wilderness for the Void Waker are often Iron Men, and Iron Men can't engage in the second half of that wilderness grind. So it creates an even more negative feedback loop. So personally, I just don't like the existence of the Void Waker. But I love the idea of having this like mid-game avenue for like super, super juiced supplies, like 30 Raynars, 30 Dragon Bones, like crazy supplies for a mid-game player that are not from difficult fights, but are from a risky environment. And I think like having that balance of filling up your looting bag with these really, really juiced Sandfew serums, whatever it may be, and then you're like, oh my god, I have like 500k in my bag. Do I get that next kill, or do I run, or am I gonna get ganked? And like it's all this. That's a really interesting space to be in without like the high pressure of, well, now I got to go get the Void Waker, my best in slot spec weapon, on like 3 to 4 end game bosses at some point. But I also wonder how many people are in the wilderness just for the Void Waker. I'd love to like speak to a Jagex developer about that. Like if they would remove the Void Waker from the wilderness boss tables and put it on a different boss entirely, how much less activity would we see in the wilderness on those bosses? For me, I feel like most people are there not for the Void Waker, at least not like when they're a bit lower level, but maybe I'm totally wrong on that. Do you feel like you have an opinion on either side there?
So there's 2 points to that. The first point I want to address is something you brought up during that, is that Iron Men don't actually have any sort of incentive to fight back, which I do agree that is a problem that has been brought up time and time again. And there was actually a solution that I saw recently that I really did like, that if you are an Iron Man and you do engage and you try to fight back and you do actually kill them, you should have that loop, maybe provided that it's like there is looting keys enabled on your account, you should be able to take the loot that you got and put it into a coffer that can only be used either on, excuse me, either on your death coffer or towards buying membership bonds. So there's an actual incentive for you to fight back as an Iron Man, since you can either, you can juice up one of those two things, right? Like being able to buy membership by anti-peeking on an Iron Man, I feel like is a really cool idea. So something like that, I think, I don't know if that would ever come into the game. I don't know if that'd be an abusable thing or whatever, but I do think that there is an interesting aspect there. But to the second point, to address it directly, I do think that it probably would end up affecting the wilderness in a pretty negative way, to just straight up make it so those bosses are still there, but you can no longer get those pieces from the bosses. Because back in the day, again, to kind of bring up the argument of people going into the wilderness and dying, the thing is, when you make an account like an Iron Man, you are willingly signing up to restrict your account. So in that regard, if you do want the Void Waker because it's a really good special attack weapon, you're kind of agreeing from the get-go that if I want that item, I restrict my whole account, I am going to go get that. That being said, that's not really a good enough argument for people, anymore. They're still going to get annoyed by it. They're still going to be like, well, I want it, I'm going to go get it, but I'm still going to have a crap time in the wilderness. So again, kind of like the compromise thing. And I'm not even saying that this is the 100% like the way forward, but I do think that at the very least, a discussion, a broader discussion, on this quote unquote solution, would be, a bit warranted. Basically, kind of like you said, take the Void Waker and don't don't move it outside of the wilderness to where you can no longer get it in the wilderness. It should still be kind of like the Dragon Pickaxe. You should still be able to get it in the wilderness, and that's the best place to do it. But you can actually get it outside of the wilderness at a different boss, albeit like, as of right now, the lowest drop rate you can get a Void Waker piece is a 1 in 912 from all three bosses. So, maybe making it like a 1 in 1500, or something like that from like new bosses or already existing bosses outside of the wilderness, whatever that would be. But, like the point being, if you were to do something like that where it still stays in the wilderness, there's still, the incentive is, if you want to get that Void Waker faster, go into the wilderness. But now you don't have to. Now you can go outside of the wilderness. I think that could be a potential middle ground. But again, this is such a contentious topic that I'm not saying that 100% that's what should be done or shouldn't be done. But I think, you kind of have to strike a balance, because there is a good reason for the wilderness, from a gameplay perspective, to be there. Kind of like you were saying, like there is value in having items come from the wilderness, and there is value in having a place like the wilderness where you can just get all these juiced up drops, kind of like you were talking about. But I also think that you should be able to get, uniques and new items from the wilderness. But, maybe it is the compromise that you don't have to go to the wilderness to get it. It's just the most optimized way to do it is the wilderness.
I think it would be a very interesting thing to test, because I'm not disagreeing with you. I think, like, let's say, for example, they put the 3 Void Waker pieces on like the Phantom Muspa table, right? A boss with only 1 unique right now. So it's like they probably, maybe wouldn't thematically fit that well, but it could, right? Like they're both
just for argument's sake, yeah.
Like I want, and let's say per piece, it's like a 1 in 1K per piece. Oh, maybe even 1 in 1500 per piece, right? I'm just genuinely wondering how many people would like filter only to Muspa as the path of least resistance, or even that being as a perception path of least resistance, even though technically it would be more resistance because it's a harder fight and takes longer, but it has less of that like ganking friction, which is just, I think like being ganked by another player is like an ego hit for a lot of people. So like that just,
it's annoying.
It's annoying.
It is. I have an account where I do go into the wilderness, obviously, on a hardcore. It is annoying to have to stop your forward progression when you're killing something that you're already sitting there, you're hunting for a ridiculous drop, like because a lot of the wilderness drop rates are just completely ridiculous. Again, because we're on the Void Waker, it's a 1 in 912 from the singles bosses, and going to the multivariant, even though it's smarter for normal Iron Men, for someone like a hardcore, that's just not going to happen, right? And a lot of
Yeah.
people aren't going to want to go into multi and just be shot down by multiple people, so they end up going to the singles variant. But it is annoying when you're sitting there and you have spent 5 hours killing a boss, and you're just getting sick of it, right? You're like, this is such an annoying thing. It's not just because the drop rate is rare, right? Because like a lot of old school RuneScape, you lock in for drop rates. You sit there and you grind. It's fine. But because at any sort of moment, at any singular moment rather, that someone could just come down and start attacking you and kill you, it's just it leaves you on edge. It's not a good feeling. It's kind of like you're preparing for a cortisol spike at any moment, so you're automatically predisposed to having a shit attitude, because you know that your forward gameplay and motion is going to stop at some point. And then to get on back there, you're going to then have to potentially find a new world, because, what if he just checks the same world? And then you could run into other players, and then, you eventually did find another world after 5-10 minutes of hopping, because maybe it's like a really active boss. And then there you go. I started killing it for another 5-10 minutes, and then someone else came along. Again, it's just annoying. Like another PK comes along to try to kill you. It's annoying. So it's, again, a fully obnoxious mechanic to have other people be able to stop your gameplay. Yeah, but I do kind of I am curious too, of what you're saying, like that sort of like if you were to move it, would it just feel as though there's a lot less pressure now to go into the wilderness, and people still might just go anyway because it is still the best path forward? I wonder if if that did anything with the dragon pickaxe, if that changed people's minds a bit of like, well, you know what, now I don't need to go to the wilderness. Maybe I still will. I don't need to, but now they have the choice to go into the wilderness or not to, and it's no longer a forced thing. I do think that again, that's something that I would really like to get a JMod perspective / sort of like some sort of like data on, because I do think that there is something there.
My general just take on it is, from like an Iron Man perspective, right? Like at the time that you're doing the wilderness bosses, generally speaking, at least from my perspective or my experience, it's in the mid game where obviously you're not fighting back against anyone ganking you, because you're like a early mid game Iron Man. Like you don't have that in you to fight back against someone with like a really crazy pure setup or Zerk setup or something. So
Yeah.
you're going for the supplies. And from my knowledge, and I just did double check it. So like, let's say Calvarion is like 2.5 mil an hour. It like the Void Waker piece is such a minuscule amount. So even if you're like a main going for gold only, like 98% of the gold you're getting from Calvarion is from its common unique table, and common drop table. And then like the skull is 4K out of the 2.5 mil. Dragon Twainer is 20K, Dragon Pickaxe 68K, Void Waker 85K, Ring of the Gods 71K. But then like Rune Pickaxe is 93K. Like so it seems like the amount of money you're earning from the fight as a main is disproportionately weighed on the juiced up common drops. And as an Iron Man, you're going for those common drops anyway. And then occasionally you obviously like, okay, I got a Void Waker piece. Maybe I'll farm out the rest. I don't know how, the problem here is I just don't know how many people are doing it differently than I did, or like what the different perspectives are, how sought after the Void Waker is, how many Iron Men go for it, how many mains go for it, although I'm assuming way less mains do. They probably just like the gold per hour being very consistent on these fights. And like,
yeah.
So that's just my perspective there of like the commons are clearly such a huge part of that table. Like it's not like a TOB situation where you're only making gold on like a side split, or maybe like like an Avernic split or something. So that's my perspective. But then again, it could just be the fact that like the Void Waker is such an exclusive item. It's such a powerful item. And when you get all three pieces, it's like fairly expensive. It's like decently expensive, although it's dropped a lot recently. Like it'd still be nice to get. And maybe that alone is a big incentive on them. I'm just very curious because as an early player, or when I was an early player doing these fights, got like 900 Calvarion kills or 700 or something like that. And I was always thinking like, man, I wish this fight existed elsewhere because because this is a really cool, fun fight that teaches new players how to do movement. Um, and obviously the Twin Titans or whatever didn't exist at the time. So I'm like, okay, that would be really cool. It's upsetting that now the half my time is just being annoyed at getting ganked. But now retrospectively, I'm like, well, sure, the fight would be great for mid game, early game players to just learn how to play the game, and that would be awesome. But creating a third variant of wilderness bosses, like, ugh, no, like let's just figure out a way to fix what is present in front of us now. And I think you brought up something kind of interesting. So we have the singles wilderness bosses, inarguably, maybe. Tell me I'm wrong, because again, my experience here is limited. I feel like they are a billion times more popular than the multi ones. I feel like the multi ones are a nightmare, but that's just my experience. Maybe unless you're doing like a clan run where it's like 40 people, in an instance or together. But like going there with like 2 or 3 people, I mean, it just seems like a nightmare. It's so difficult to escape a multi-combat scenario. How do you feel about the multi-single split there?
Honestly, I'm not even sure myself because I am much more of a singles PKer. I know that there are a lot of clans that do specifically PK at at these multi-variant bosses. That being said, I'm really not sure how popular it is to do it for money versus like the uniques, because like for the uniques, let's just take like RDO for example, versus like Callisto, right?
Mhm.
So for RDO to go to just hit the drop table, for like the uniques on that, like the Dragon 2H, the Dragon Pickaxe, Claws of Callisto, Tyrannical Ring, Void Waker. It's a 1 in 103 chance to hit that, right? But kind of like you're saying, no one gives a crap about the Tyrannical Ring. No one really cares about the Claws of Callisto unless you're also going for like rev weapons or whatever. So these are kind of all low value drops. Like the Dragon Pickaxe a while ago, it used to be a pretty good value drop. I think it was like a 4 or 5 mil drop or something like that. It's about like 450K, I think.
Yeah, it's so cheap now.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. But assuming that people are going, like it's an Iron Man in this situation, and they're going for like the Void Waker hilt, it's a 1 in 103 to obviously hit the table at the singles version, and then to then hit the Void Waker hilt. In total, it's a 1 in 912 chance, right? So it's a lot to. You have to spend a long time to get that Void Waker, right? That Void Waker piece. Then at the multi variant, it's a 1 in 56, maybe like close to like 1 in 57 drop rate to hit the unique table, and it's no longer the rarest item to hit on that table, right? Like the rarest item in the singles is the hilt, and then in multi, it's the ring, which is the rarest item at like a 1 in 512. Now, if you want to get the Void Waker hilt, you only have to kill that multi-variant 360 times in theory. It's a 1 in 360. So, for that alone, I would imagine that it is popular amongst normal Ironmen. But again, if the problem of getting hit in singles is ridiculous, I got to imagine it's so much worse getting hit in multi. So
Yeah.
it's very popular to do the singles version, even if it does mean you're going to spend a lot more time, just because you can teleport out with one click in the singles version, but you cannot teleport out in the multi version because like I think they're all in different levels, but like something like Callisto, I think has got to be in level 40 something.
Yeah, it's pretty
So
deep.
yeah, it's deep is the point. So I can't imagine that that the multi version is more popular to do than the singles version. But again, I don't know. I genuinely don't. My best guess would be that the singles version is more popular, even though it is, obviously a lot more likely that you will hit the Void Waker hilt at the multi version. But it's that's just got to be obnoxious. I don't even know if I personally, even if I was a normal Iron Man, would want to sit there and grind that out in the multi version, knowing that I'll just get completely, screwed over at some point multiple times. And it's like, at least in the singles version, I do have a decent chance to survive. I can escape, I can catch a freeze, and I can just run or something
Yep.
like that. Or like maybe like I run around like the corner or something for like a freeze log. But it's you basically don't have any chance in hell to
Yeah,
survive in the
and
multi. So
that was
I would
my
imagine,
experience as well with that multi.
yeah.
Or at least my group Byron partner who tried to do a couple multi, but it was like, every in a singles the gank is, well, even if you have an alt, it's very easy to tell. But with multis, it's like not only having an alt doesn't really matter. There's multiple entrances. Usually ganks are flanking, and they're all or clans are either flanking or just waiting for you at multiple different areas. So when you're trying to escape, they're going to catch a freeze. Anyway, it's borderline impossible to escape in a multi scenario. And obviously the caves themselves in that environment are dangerous alone if you're inexperienced anyway. And I know we had the idea originally with the sailing release is to speed run 2350 total level and just hop on those new worlds when there's like 20 people on them, but that didn't end up planning out. But regardless, I think that the reason I bring that up is to tie it into, really for a quick moment, to that original idea of putting the Void Waker on a different boss, not and keeping it on the Wilderness bosses still, but putting it on a different boss at an even rarer rate. And the singles being, so I feel, and JMod, feel free to correct me, I feel singles are so much more popular than multi, even though it's a longer grind, more time consuming. I feel like the second Void Waker exists outside of the Wilderness, we're going to see the plurality of Void Wakers coming into the game out of the Wilderness. It will just be seen as a very long, annoying grind out of the Wilderness. And that's my fundamental concern there, where as much as I want the Void Waker to be available outside of the Wilderness, because as an Iron Man, there's that friction of getting ganked, not being able to do much from it, even if I get like a kill on them or whatever, and that sucks. It's the friction of just getting ganked, period. And the length of the grind itself without engaging in the multi stuff. Now, if it's on like Muspa at a 1500 drop rate, I can go back to Muspa, no problem. That's 4,500 kills. That's a lot of Muspa. It'll definitely be a painful grind, but is that worth it for most people? As crazy as it sounds, for people that are grinding out Void Waker as Iron Man, I think it might be. And that's like my really big fear, right? I would even compare it to like Imbued Heart, where I always felt like Imbued Heart should be like a 1 in 10k off of any Slayer boss, just as like a fun random item that can happen. But
I do like that idea too. For the
yeah,
record, as an aside,
I think
it
that
feels kind of crazy right now.
Yeah, it feels crazy and just weird, and I don't know. So it'd be kind of fun to just oh man, I got a super lucky thing off Cerberus, right? Fun. But now, in this case, it's you're taking a big incentive from the Wilderness, moving it somewhere else, and now everyone's just I feel like everyone's gonna be flocking to that thing, unless it's so absurdly, stupidly insane, original Nightmare drops or something. But even then,
yeah,
right? Because I feel like the Void Waker is more useful than every single Nightmare item. So it's if people weren't grinding Nightmare because so it's just and it's really good on Nightmare, but it's a really weird scenario. And the reason I wanted to start this whole conversation off with Wilderness bosses is because they are, I think, the main non-PvP incentive for the Wilderness. The second one are the clues. And I think your solution that you had 2 clues in your still framed second channel video that you uploaded about the Wilderness, which people should check out, is just having Wilderness specific clues. I think is a really cool idea. Having a more lucrative clue table from a Wilderness specific clue that's in the medium, maybe a medium hard level stepwise, but is risky because you're in the Wilderness and might require you to complete certain steps while bringing risk. So people that are getting ganked for doing a clue with a spade aren't going to make Reddit posts about it. And then but maybe you're rolling 2 times more clue tables, right? You roll a table and it could be a hard table, but rolled twice as much, right? That's the crazy risk there or something like that. Maybe that would be a way to really incentivize clue scrolls in the Wilderness without also making it feel terrible to do hard clue scrolls as a non-Wildy enjoyer,
Yeah. And then, forgive me if you did mention this, but then the other aspect of that is to kind of make it more fair. You do remove clue scrolls in general from the
Yes.
wilderness, like from the regular, clue table. So or like from the regular clue step. So like now if you have like a hard elite or master, you never need to go in there. And the reason why, I think that is a solid idea is because I've PK'd for a very long time. I've PK'd in basically every spot you can think of. And something that I did used to do back in the day, I would want to kill clue scrollers because, they would potentially have, their clue book on them, or they potentially have cash on them. They potentially have like all their gear on them or whatever, just doing a clue because they just couldn't be bothered to bank. And then you get just such a ridiculous amount of GP. But like that is not really that much of a thing anymore. And don't get me wrong, 100%, you still will find those people, right? There's always going to be those people that are like, you know what, fuck it. No one's gonna, like, the wilderness is so dead. No one's going to kill me. They run out there, and then, there's me sitting there waiting, and that's like the 68th clue scroll doer that I've like tried to kill. And then this guy finally has stuff, right? Like you are, obviously taking away that, but I would argue that if I have to sit there and kill 67 clue scrollers to then kill that 68th clue scroller and finally get some sort of loot, like the average, maybe I'll get like 10 mil at most or whatever, in like a lot of those circumstances. I would argue you basically just wasted my time as a PKer, for those 67 kills that you incentivized those people to go into the wilderness for all those different clues. And you just wasted all those 67 clue scrollers times too, because, me as the PKer, you kind of have to check to see if everyone has something on them, right? Because maybe people didn't realize they didn't bank their cash or whatever, but the vast majority of them are not going to have anything on them, but one of them might. So, if you kind of just take away that, reason to go into the wilderness, right? And now instead of, me killing a clue scroller 67 times, I get nothing. I now kill a clue scroller who is doing a wilderness clue. I'm not even necessarily saying that this is the correct balancing of it, but it's just something that has been suggested. It could make sense. It could be abused or whatever. Maybe I PK that person and I get their clue, and now I can, start. Maybe it starts from step 0 or whatever, but maybe I now get their clue. Now, again, there's room for, boosting in a scenario like that of like, oh, I'll sell you my wilderness clues or whatever. Maybe that's like the more, like the better thing to do in general or whatever. But like, in fact, maybe even not, because kind of like you were saying, if it's like like a double roll on like the hard clue table, maybe, the numbers work out to where it'd be quote unquote better to get like a third age piece or whatever. Although you could also, have it so it does borrow from like the hard clue table, but you can also have it like wilderness uniques too, something like the Dagenhai or whatever.
Yeah.
Or just, like maybe like a rev weapon at like a crazy like rate or something like that. And I don't know.
I think
like,
rev weapons from them would be fucking sick. Like that would be cool as hell. Because right now rev weapons, like rev caves are pretty popular from what I understand, but like I look at the rates, even with like a fully stacked, like the Avarice and the Skull, it is insane from what I can see. So I'm just like, that would be a cool avenue as like a rare alternative, exciting, like, oh my God, I'm like, I just rolled the fucking a crossbow or whatever it's called before.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think again that would be really cool to where it's like, you can make it so wilderness rare items, you maybe don't have to sit there and kill revenants all the time, for that crazy drop rate. Maybe just do wilderness clues. Like what let's say, because these wilderness clues too, ideally, they would come from the wilderness. So it's like a closed loop where you don't get them from outside of the wilderness. You get them inside the wilderness. Maybe I'm sitting there killing revs or whatever. And, kind of like all the other clues, you can like stack up to like 5, wilderness clues. And then I just do all 5 of those clues. And, oh, wow. Like, you know what? I got lucky. I hit like a 1 in, 2,000 in a clue or whatever. And now I rolled the revenant drop table. That's so sick. So happy. Yeah. Now I don't need to do revenants anymore, type of thing. I can go do other stuff in the wilderness. I do think something like that would be a very fun incentive to go and do those clues. And again, there's a lot of different ways that they could be balanced. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I do have the balancing down, but I personally do not see the value anymore in PKing clue scrollers for nothing, because it doesn't help me, it doesn't help them. If anything, like me as a PKer, I can sit there and be like, I've spent 7 hours today trying to find people in like these weird spots, you know, or like the wilderness lever or whatever. I've spent 7 hours today trying to find people, you know, risking and you know, doing whatever, because you know, like maybe like I'm like more like an average PKer. I don't want to go and run into all these like, you know, high risk or not high risk, like crazy strong PKing, you know, opponents out there. Maybe I don't want to do that. So, you know, that's kind of why I'm going to the like these random weird niche locations, right?
Mhm.
Like
I'm
maybe yeah, maybe me. Go ahead.
No, all I was gonna say is I'm kind of curious about on this topic. Like, I want to throw an idea at you and see how you maybe you can poke holes in it, or
Okay.
whether you agree with it or not. So when it comes to wilderness clue scrolls, and like my idea for that would be the reward you get is proportionate to the amount of money you're risking while getting it. So like imagine to do the clue scroll, you need to be risking at least like 100K. But then if you risk all the way up to like 2 mil, let's say 2 mil is the cap, you have a high, you roll more on that clue scroll when you open it. As in like but you need to actually do the steps with that amount risked.
Yeah.
So the more you're risking, the more reward potential you have. And the less you're risking, the less reward potential you have, but you'd still get more than your average clue scroll because you need to be risking something. And that way, like the clue scrollers that are being hunted are potentially choosing to risk more, but are also bringing like an anti setup or something, right? Like that could
Yeah.
be its own interesting dynamic of, okay, this guy clearly is risking a lot, you know, but he might like, I don't know, be hiding a void waker in there, like, and will try anti me or something. Like there could be some interesting dynamics with requiring a risk, which technically, and the reason I came up with this idea is already something that kind of exists in the wilderness with like requiring entry costs to the rev caves, wilderness
Yeah.
bosses and stuff like that. How do you feel about that?
I do like what you're saying with that. I do think that is a very interesting way of looking at it. So when I, because the clue scroll idea, this is something that's been around for a bit, right? This is I think Mod Manked introduced this a couple years ago or whatever. It's been talked about by like a lot of different people. So and there's been different iterations of it, but like ideally, the best way to go about doing this for the health of the wilderness is to have actual risk attached to it, like you're saying. That being said, I try thinking about it from like a what would pass a poll type of thing. You know, but like maybe you could do something like this straight up, and you know it has to be one of those like pull together type of things where it's like realistically you are doing a major service for a player that does not want to go into the wilderness anymore. And you're also doing a major service for someone that does actually want to go into the wilderness and try something like this out, because you know they can get so much more loot from it. It's just so much more lucrative. And you know what? If they die, then they willingly, as you said, signed up for how much risk they actually want to attach to it. And I would imagine a good portion of people would just attach like the full 2 mil risk to it. And I think that'd be sick. So it's like as a PKer, I get to kill someone, even if I don't get the clue or whatever, I get like 2 mil from that.
Yeah.
So good, right? Like that's such a good alternative. And you know what? Me, like the other side of it, like me as like someone that would be doing that like on like my Iron Man or my hardcore Iron Man, I would have absolutely no problem sitting there and dealing with all those different PKers trying to get me, because it's like the incentive would be so good for me to try to get like these rare rewards. Or even if it's like it just gives you like a decent amount of cash, because again, like you hit the hard clue table, you double roll it, like it would just be, you know, a much more incentivizing thing to do from like from both sides, like from the PK side of me and then from like the Iron Man side of me. I think that would be really interesting, but again, I don't know how it would be perceived. I personally love that idea. I would really be interested to see what other people kind of think about that specific idea.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear some of the comments or read some of the comments here because I feel like, and I'm coming from this as someone with very little vested interest in it, in that like I just don't like clue scrolls at all. I have a very negative relationship with medium clues specifically because I don't have the ranger boots yet to upgrade my Avernic treads, and it's a pain in the ass, and I don't like the fact that this item comes from the medium clues. But with all of that said, I think that idea in a vacuum would incentivize people who do enjoy clue scrolls, which there are a pretty decent amount. And I feel like that group of players are more so like hunting the clogs, right? Even if, or even just like the profit from a really rare item, which that incentive of like risking X amount, getting a higher chance at getting like something great out of it. I think that same logic applies to like even just buying imps or whatever, right? Eclectics, right? That drop mediums off the Grand Exchange to save you time. That like, okay, well, if I buy enough, eventually it's going to pay out. Like things like that, I think really fit. And with the wilderness specifically, the clue scrolls aren't tradable. So there's no way to really manipulate that like market, so to say, right? Like you can't just buy the Wildy step clues. And on this topic, so I like that we're landing on some solutions here, or at least some suggestions for solutions. I want to quickly touch on what you brought up way earlier in the conversation with how the dragon pickaxe now was proliferated into the Calphite Queen table. And I don't think that's why it dropped in price, because if I had to guess, most people are getting their pickaxes from the Wildy bosses still.
No,
I don't know.
It was botted. Yeah. That's why it dropped in price. Yeah, it didn't drop because it went outside. Yeah.
Yeah. But I like that idea. And now what that got me thinking of, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too, is the reverse of that. So something I've been a huge advocate for ever since I started doing it a year or so ago at this point, maybe a half a year ago. And I've talked to Mod Arcane about it, and many mods about it, privately and in public, is the Fasani's table. It's awful. It has the majority of the items are completely useless. If you were to remove the Nightmare Staff and the 3 orbs, even that would be a stacked table that has like as many uniques as like TOA. Like that alone is crazy. Now it has more uniques than both raids, not Cox not included. It's just insane. It's an insane thing. And I've always advocated for moving the staff off the Fasani's table. A, because they're awful drops that don't have any use for Iron Men, and for mains, while they are a lot of gold, it's also just like this like really bizarre kind of experience of getting these like really rare items that are so hyper niche that you're rarely using them, so they're always just going to be pitched to the Grand Exchange. So what if something like the inverse happens, where we can keep them on the Fasani table or the Nightmare table, whatever, or remove them like I would suggest, and put them somewhere in the wilderness? The existence of a really rare, annoying item outside of the wilderness, and instead of just buffing those rates and just kind of like, let's see what happens with the economy, putting them into a riskier scenario where they're still obtainable, creates the inverse of that dragon pickaxe situation, where now let's say the orbs are obtainable also from a brand new wilderness boss that requires some risk to actually engage in, but maybe the orbs are more approachable in that regard. And on top of that, kind of fits because at least the oh my god, I'm forgetting what it's called now. The volatile orb is only used in PvP anyway, so it kind of fits there too. I don't know. I what do you think about that?
I really love that idea. Obviously, something like that. I'll tell you, if you're gonna try to get any new boss in the wilderness, even if it's with an old drop table, and you do the inverse of kind of like you were saying, you bring it from the Fasani's, which I do agree. Fasani's just sucks. The normal Nightmare sucks, and Fasani sucks. I don't like it at all. Yeah. And you really don't see much value. I feel like they're like really niche. Like I only ever used those armors whenever I was doing like CAs personally, but that doesn't mean that those armors wouldn't be, useful elsewhere. Like something like the Inquisitor, I do think, like it would. I kind of like consider it to be like mid game to like, not end game, but like closer to like the mid to end game range than like anywhere near end game, because it's like a 30 defense armor. I think it has the same stats, or very like equivalent to like adamant, right?
Yep.
So it's more so about the offensive aspect of it, like the offensive stats. I do think there'd be like a lot of value in just moving, at least maybe even not that, but just moving them elsewhere. And that would be sick to have them, in the wilderness, because they really, like you said, are not doing much for Fasanis, because who's really sitting there doing Fasanis and being like, I love this? Like,
Yeah.
no one. At Fasanis, I think it's like a 1 in 103 or something,
Yeah, I think like
like chance
112
at the drop
or something
table.
like that. Yeah.
So
Eh,
yeah, it's somewhere thereabouts. I would love that personally. Like, you introduce a new boss, I wouldn't want to have it be done with something like I don't even know if you know this. Do you know what like Wrathmaw was?
yeah, yeah,
At
of course, of
that
course.
yeah, that, like, again, I'm not gonna sit here and like crap all over the idea, but I did not like it, right? And that,
Yeah.
like, you know what, trying new stuff, because the idea was really to like bring something like with Dead Man Mode, there's like these breaches
Breaches, yeah.
where yeah, you know them, but like basically trying to like bring like a time gated loot incentive to the wilderness so people would all flock there and everything. But really, I did not like that, right? But like, I don't necessarily think there is an issue with bringing, and maybe at this point it'll just be like tainted because of like the name. I like, if Wrathmaw was brought in, but it's like its own specific boss fight and like like its own specific little like lot in the wilderness that like you built onto it, and it's not like propping all up. That could be like a pretty good like upcoming or like next wilderness boss, and then you do have like this juiced up drop table with all these different like rares or whatever. Maybe you come up with uniques, but maybe, like you're saying, you just put something like some drops from the Fasani's drop table on there, and make it so it's just another way to get it. Because I personally think I would sit there and grind out something like Inquisitor on an Iron Man from like a Wrathmaw or like a new boss like that.
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
Like I think, like, for me, like, I wasn't even thinking about Inquisitor. I was thinking more just the orbs and staff, like the 4 items there. But like Inquisitor too, frankly. But like, yeah, I feel like the orbs and staff, they are like a 1 in. Are they still a 1 in 1500 from Nightmare? It's something like ridiculous like that. And it's like a 6-minute fight, which is insane. On top of that,
Yeah.
But like they're super rare off Nightmare. So
That's some
imagine
good
now,
gear.
yeah, and now imagine like they were on a separate table on the wilderness, maybe even just as rare or maybe a bit more common, and it's just the 3 orbs and the staff, right? Or even just the 3 orbs. Those orbs on their own would be a bigger incentive to me for non-iron specifically to go to that boss, because they are ludicrously expensive. Like a harm right now is what, like 300 mil, I think. Like,
Is it?
let me. Maybe I'm totally off here. I could be just completely off. 1 second. Yeah. Oh, it's 200 mil.
It's 200. It's 200. Yeah,
yeah.
that's still good.
Yeah.
It would reduce in price, but you know what? There's still value in it. So, like, all in all, like, I do understand, by the way, that you were coming at it from like the standpoint of just like the staff and like the orbs or whatever, because that's basically how you framed it. But I was more so thinking like the Inquisitor armor too. Like I guess I was looking more so at the whole drop table. But yeah, even if it is just like the Nightmare like staff and the orbs, especially because, like you were saying, 2 out of the 3 of those orbs are basically just used in PvP and like kind of rarely outside of
Yeah.
PvP. Like, I do think something like that would work. So it's a really interesting idea. And again, like I do think that there, like an idea like that, and then other ideas could really go like a long way to like making the wilderness just like a lot more rich with content. But like, I guess really the problem is like, if something like this was to be suggested, I don't know how popular it would be with like the larger
I,
audience.
I would
You
be
know what I mean?
I would genuinely be so curious, because first of all, I agree the prices would drop. I don't think they would drop that much, but I could see them. Let's say they drop like 50%, something like more extreme. Let's say that Harmonize is 100, Eldritch is like 105, and Volatile is like 18 mil. That alone is still way more profitable if the drop rates are tenable than anything you would see from any of the wilderness bosses. That's like still a crazy profitable. Like, you get a harm, it's 100 mil from a wilderness boss. That's crazy, right? So you're like, holy shit, that's an insane drop. People will probably be lingering around that area just for the off chance of obtaining a crazy get like that.
That would work so well.
Yeah,
It would do wonders for it. And you know what? Again, why would you not try that as someone? You could hate the wilderness, but you'd be like, you know what? Like, all I have to do is just hit that drop table. I can die and sit there. I could die 50 times and lose like 20 mil. But the moment I hit that drop, I have just 5x'd any amount of risk that I would have lost. Like, it is worth it 100% if you were to do something like that. So I really would be curious to see, something
I'd
like that
also be
happen.
curious in regard to how the players would respond to it, because like I think players are instinctively like obviously anti-wilderness. They're instinctively anti-wilderness bosses that incentivize PVM engagement because they'll feel pressure to do that. But I feel like that really applies heavily to wilderness-specific uniques that aren't obtainable anywhere else, like the Void Waker, right? Like I think that creates a lot of negative feedback loop, like a negative feedback loop. But
Yeah.
when the harm staff and the orb and eldritch orb, volatile orb, whatever, would all still be obtainable from a different thing, in this world that we're creating, I feel like all that would do is it would incentivize a riskier but quicker grind, or a slower but more guaranteed kind of like less risky grind. Um, I'm wonder. I don't know if that's ever been like that idea. Well, first of all, was the dragon pickaxe thing pulled like specifically?
I think it was, but really, yeah. Maybe I'm not remembering correctly, but I'm pretty sure it was pulled. But like realistically, who's going to vote no to that? Like
Right.
another, no one's no one's going to vote no to that. You
I
know what I
would
mean? So like,
like my
go
thing
ahead.
is always, and I'm very like, I always talk about Nightmare specifically because it's a boss that I like the fight. I just despise everything else. And it's this one of these situations where obviously there's not a lot of use for Inquisitor now. As you mentioned, you get some of this CAs with it, but even nowadays you don't even need it for like crush bonus or anything because of the horn that Yama drops. So like it's a really weird situation. And obviously the orbs, at least for an Iron Man, are almost completely entirely useless, right? Like you have a better
Yeah.
chance getting a shadow than you are in harm. It's just insane. So, and what are you even going to use elemental weaknesses on it in the end game, which is like a Fasani tier end game fight,
Yeah.
right? So it's just this weird situation. And I think that I always promote like I would like to see like Nightmare, the group version, be changed into like a Fasani type fight with less chip damage and more like difficult mechanics as a harder group fight with better drops. But all of that is to say that in like that fictional summer sweep up where that occurs, I would love to see them maybe be like, well, what if? How do you guys feel about us keeping the drop rate the same here? And now that they've already improved them multiple times, the fight's shorter now, so they're more attainable. But what if we put them on a new wilderness boss over here, and they're a bit more attainable there, and it's just going to be these three items that are also just very wilderness specific items on their own, and you can still get them
I would
elsewhere.
think you need to put the staff there too.
Yeah, the staff there too.
But yeah, yeah,
4 items. Yeah, and which I think is perfect sense. Like 3 to 4 items is like perfect amount of uniques for a fight, right? Like Fasani's has
yep,
7, 8 uniques, which is stupid as hell.
it
And
is. Besides,
four
this is just a stupid update in
yeah,
general.
it's just a bizarre thing. So I would love to hear, and it's such like a niche set of items that I don't think have a lot of like passion behind them. There's not like a lot of people going like, no, keep the fucking orbs there. Like they're probably fine with moving them a
Yeah.
little. Yeah. So I'd be very curious. And if it fails a poll by like 70%, like, or I should say, sorry, if it fails with 70% of the votes, or no, that's a pass. If it fails with like
Yeah,
68% of the
68.
votes,
Yeah,
yeah. If that's the case to me, I'm like, okay, give it 2 years and repoll it, it'll pass. That's all that means to me. But if it fails with like
yeah,
49% like Rathma did, okay, then now let's figure out a different solution. I'd just be interested.
yeah.
And I'd love to hear what people have to say in the comments, because to me, making the wilderness like a quote unquote shortcut to a shorter grind on some of the more difficult to obtain items in the game that aren't like mega rares or whatever, is a very interesting like position for the wilderness, because the incentives then aren't just you go here if you want X thing, it's you go here if you want to speed up X thing, which for a game like old school RuneScape, which is 90% of the player base's favorite thing, is speeding up a grind, right? Like making things a little bit faster, min-maxing, being a bit more meta in that regard. I feel like that would fit really well within those people's headspace, at least theoretically, right?
I totally agree with you, and I feel like that should be the design philosophy of the wilderness, because even if you go back to like the wilderness when it was like first released back in the day, uh, what like 2000. Let's just go to like 2004, 2005, whatever. A couple years after it. A lot of what people wanted to do was go into the wilderness and kill green dragons because the money there was just so good from the green or from like the bones, like the dragon bones. That's what like a lot of people would do, and then that would lure in other players to try to go PK them, and then people would try to PK them or whatever. Right? Like it was like the cat and mouse game, right? It was like the predator versus prey, aspect. And all in all, I think that even though people fundamentally hate that, I do think it is such an important part of the wilderness. But I kind of where I kind of like split off from other people that are like just accept the fact that the wilderness is a risky place is, and where I try to find more common ground is exactly where you're saying, where it's like the wilderness should serve as a place where you can get really good loot, really good supplies, and kind of like you're saying, in an ideal world you go there to just speed up a grind. And if something like this were to come into the game, I think it'd make perfect sense, because now you can go and get like the nightmare staff, like all the orbs or whatever. Like again, 2 out of 3 of them are mainly PvP centric anyway. I do think that it would make a lot of sense to kind of do like not just like the move the Void Waker outside of the wilderness, in terms of put it on some other boss, kind of like you're saying, like the random example, like a Phantom Muspa. Now you have to kill Muspa 4,500 times. But again, it's still the best thing to go into the wilderness and kill it there, or rather, not or. And in addition to, you make a new boss and then you take the orbs and you move it there. So in the like you kind of like package it as like an overhaul of the wilderness, right? Like we will make it so much less. Like you guys don't need to go into the wilderness as much anymore. You'll get the Void Waker outside, but then as a compromise, people can also get the orbs inside of the wilderness, and it's going to be like a lot more, profitable adventure and quicker adventure for people that want these items, or just want like good incentive or like monetary incentive overall. I do think, if the wilderness was to survive and thrive, that would be a very good way to do it. But that's maybe not. Maybe I'm not seeing the other side of it. But I do agree. I like the idea of having like just stupidly rare items be on drop tables, in the wilderness, or bring new items over and just kind of making new incentives and new reasons to go in there, because it is a very unique piece of content. I don't know many other games that have anything similar to the wilderness whatsoever.
Yeah.
And I'm glad, because like you said earlier on in your journey, you were very much annoyed with something, like doing all the lower tier wilderness bosses, but like as you go on, you've seen much more value in actually what the wilderness provides. And I do think there's way too much negative connotations and negative feelings towards the wilderness, that if you just kind of remove some of those like barriers of like I have to go in, now you don't have to go in, it will kind of help people see like, oh, okay, you know what, maybe the wilderness is not anywhere near as bad as people are saying, especially now that I don't have to go in. And maybe that makes more people want to go in, especially because there's just so much money to be made there.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And that's actually a great segue here into just talking about the players engage. So we've been talking about the incentives from a PVM prey predator kind of dynamic. I want to touch on incentives from just like a PvP space, because I think the PvP in old school is really unique, really interesting. It's something that I immediately gravitated to when I first started playing the game. I kind of do this little anecdote in the beginning of my recent like old school video about it being very difficult, and my first realization for that was playing LMS as a new player and just kind of starting to picture like all this insane tech that I'm seeing that people utilize. And Since then, I've obviously gained a much deeper knowledge on the game, but the PvP is just such an insane skill ceiling. It's an insane just power, or not power curve. It's an insane like skill curve required to even enter it. Skill floor, I guess is the term. Very difficult to kind of breach that. And then on top of all of that, you have just the risky nature of it in general, which disincentivizes people from participating, even if they want to do that. So with that in mind, you have a couple of ideas, and I'd want to touch on those. I also want to mention just LMS as a mini game to me is such an awesome kind of like introduction to that. It's a riskless PvP space where your stats are completely scaled perfectly to be within a specific bracket, and you're fighting people within those same stat brackets. And on top of all that, you kind of have that fun like gear battle royale-esque kind of looting of the chests and getting gear done before your final match. I think LMS, despite its botting issue, is probably one of the is my favorite minigame by a infinite margin. And unfortunately, because of its botting issue, they can't ingratiate more interesting rewards into it. And most recently, we saw them moving a lot of those rewards away from it. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on everything I just said there.
So more so, are you trying to say sort of like incentives for PvP to learn PvP like LMS and like the reward shops specifically?
Yeah, like essentially, like sorry, I know that was a big yap there on my part. So like the
No, I yap too. It's all good.
Like LMS to me is in some ways a very cool tutorial for PvP because it's essentially engaging with tribe raiding, like the hardest stuff in PvP, in a totally safe, riskless environment where the only thing that will be damaged or lost is your ego. It's kind of like exactly what should happen to get people into it. Like I got into PvP in some ways because of LMS. So I love what LMS is doing. And the only reason I even discovered what LMS is doing is because I wanted the rune pouch when I first started playing the game. Since then, I've went back to LMS many times. I got my Swift Blade just for the fun of it, maybe to use it in TOB. I got the, a bunch of crystal seeds for farming when I was still on my Bofa stuff. Like really, really cool stuff. And recently, they announced that they're moving a lot of that reward away from LMS. And I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on that, or even if you agree that LMS is a good on-ramp for PvP.
I don't know necessarily how I feel about them removing it. On one hand, I do like that they would be moving more rewards to Bounty Hunter, and it means more reason to actually go and do Bounty Hunter. I do think that in and of itself is solid for like PvP in terms of like actual like people who want to make money PKing. And engaging in like I guess I would say like the quote unquote real side of PvP, because there's a lot of PvP in this game, like like LMS, like Castle Wars or whatever, that is player versus player, but it's not got the classic death death mechanics of I just peek out all this guy's stuff, right?
Yeah.
So on one hand, I do think that is a bit I do like that you can get those items from Bounty Hunter, but maybe. I don't know. I really don't know what to say. I'm not like huge into the idea of them moving those things, but like I can at least see the value in them doing it. But that being said, I do think LMS is a good place to kind of get some sort of introduction to PvP. But I really kind of feel as though it is kind of like, if you want to teach someone math, you're not going to start with multiplication. Right.
Yeah, because you're getting tri-bit setups like off rip and stuff in LMS. Yeah, that's a big. Like, I definitely agree with that. It is kind of like a trial by fire in that it's more complicated, but simultaneously, because it has no risk attached to the complexity, it maybe feels a bit more approachable in that just alone. But yeah, I agree with you in general too. And I wish maybe there was more time invested in a game like that or a mini game like that that allows people to do like starter setups, starter runs, all this kind of stuff. But like the reason I bring it up is because I think LMS is why I got into PvP. I think things like All-Stars, the MM All-Stars Season 1 that happened like, a year or so ago, like that stuff really reiterated how much I enjoy watching it. But things like just the idea that the only reason I discovered PvP in the first place in this game as a group Ironman is by doing this mini game for a rune pouch. And I know you can
Yeah.
still get the rune pouch there, which is nice, but I'm just, it's a little sad that those kinds of incentives are being detrimental or detrimented, removed or impacted in some way because I would hate if even less people would get interested in this through, because I feel like I'm not the only one. And I think Jagex has tried in some ways to get more people into PvP, right? Like a great example of this, and we can touch on it, is DMM, the recent one, which I played as well. But like LMS is kind of like the risk-free version, the PvP light of just starting to kind of grasp the mechanics, because the mechanics are so tough and complicated and unintuitive and weird in PvP that like otherwise the only way to get them is, I guess, just running in there with like with Black
Trial by fire,
Beehive.
exactly
Yeah,
like you're saying.
yeah. So maybe I don't know if you want to touch on your idea of tutorializing first before we get into DMM for a moment. Which one would you want
Yeah,
to go
yeah,
into?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
We can. Yeah.
yeah,
So what I think all in all is that pretending like the only type of PvP in this game that can be enjoyed is triberding, I think is, it's missing, the bigger picture, right? It's like it's the end game, I would say, of PvP, right? It's basically like you're doing, like a hard mode Tob or whatever is like the equivalent of trying to do, like hybriding PKing or triberding PKing with overheads and everything, right? Like there are a lot of other different aspects of PvP too that like people kind of seem to, look or like skip over, and even Jagex kind of seems to skip over. Like something that really used to be a thing back in the day, and of course it is still a thing now, but I would argue that it's nowhere near as prevalent as it used to be, is like pure PKing on like a lower newbie level account. Like that's what like Bounty Hunter back in the day used to be really popular for. It's like you just want to make a new account and just go ranged PKing, and then you try to spec someone out with a Granite Maul. That is like a really simple form of PKing. In the majority of those fights, nobody has overheads or anything, and if they do, then you're not gonna even fight them. Because you're sitting on there like on like a level 50, 60, maybe even like 70 or whatever. And a lot of it is, you're either just using like a Dragon Scimitar into like a DDS or like D-Claws or like a G-Maul or whatever, or like you're using like a range into a G-Maul, and it's like that's like probably amongst the more simple forms of PvP. And like even though that is still a thing, it's nowhere near as much of a thing as it used to be back in the day. And it's like that's just one element of like PKing. That's like I would consider to be like one of the basics of PKing. And then you do obviously end up moving up with things like even just like smiting, that like adds like a whole different like dynamic into like PvP, because now it's like prayer conservation and management and everything, along with learning how to properly defend yourself by eating and everything, because the DPS is obviously going to be lower in like a pure like a lower pure bracket, and then as you move up the DPS is going to be a lot higher, so like there's a lot more levels of complexity to it. And realistically, as of right now, there's nothing in this game that teaches you that. So, yes, you could do LMS, but again, it's not going to be a solid enough tutorial. And the thing
yeah.
is, I do think there are a lot of ways that you can incentivize people to learn. Kind of like, LMS, again, is a perfect example of something you could do, because people want to do that because they want to get their rewards from the shop. It's always about the rewards in the end. Like, how many people do you think would play LMS if there was no rewards to it?
Yeah, exactly.
Like
That's exactly what
realistically,
I'm saying.
no
Exactly.
one would
Yeah.
be there. No one would be there, and like there is like this whole thing too that a lot of people tend to worry about. Like, well, what about the botting situation of like dealing with it? And it's like I do think if you can put some sort of limitations to make it harder for bots to get there, then yeah, you can do that. But like they're like bots poison every single aspect of this game. So to sit there and punish players for it as a way to deter bots, which isn't even going to ultimately deter them, it's going to make them spend another 2 or 3 days building their accounts to go and then do that content. I think that is just the wrong way of like kind of fighting. I think having monetary incentives in any sort of learning curve of the game is the best way to get people to want to learn something else. So like that's all of what PVM is, right? Like all these different bosses, something like a Brutus, you start off, that's like the newest low level boss that teaches you the basic mechanics or whatever. At best, you can get like, I don't even know what they would be. They're not going to be that expensive. Like the cow slippers, maybe like
Yeah.
a 100, 200K drop or whatever. But you see people doing PVM and like they're getting mills and mills. So you want to build up to it. It's like, okay, well now let me go to Scurious. You sit there, you do Scurious, and you learn a lot more mechanics, but like you really don't have any like major monetary incentives or whatever. So you just do that just to get some decent training XP and to get some decent like PVM experience under your belt, and then you move up to like Royal Titans, and then eventually you keep moving up the ladder until you find yourself doing something like a Chambers of Zarek, or like even like a beginner like TOA. And there are these different monetary incentives at like these different levels to teach you to keep moving up the PVM ladder of growing your skill and your experience. But the only thing that there is in this game for PvP is LMS. And again, you're just starting by pushing them into the deep end of the pool. They haven't even learned to swim yet. They've seen people swim, but they don't know how to swim. So you got to get people's like feet wet. You got to give them something else to, in my opinion, you got to give them something else to where they can learn all these different aspects of PvP, because it's not just, oh, teach them how to tribrid, but you do it one step at a time. It's like, yeah, you can totally do that, but teach them how to properly eat, teach them how to triple eat, teach them how to react appropriately in terms of like their overhead prayers, teach them how to properly go for like one tick special attacks or whatever to kind of catch their opponent off guard, and all teach them how to like do Edgeville style fighting, where it is a lot slower paced. But all in all, why are they going to want to learn this? Give them monetary incentives to learn all of this, because if there's an actual monetary incentive behind why should I learn this thing, then they're gonna be like, okay, well, you know what? Even if it's like 500K an hour, or it's like, oh, I don't have to do LMS for my rune pouch anymore. Now I can go and do like this other thing, and I can also maybe get like these different like small unique rewards, like bladed Ceridome Bruise or whatever in the process. Why don't I do that? I don't have to immediately go and put myself in the deep end and have a trial by fire in LMS. I can now go and have like a much more simple, slowed down experience that will kind of, even if I never use it, even if I never go into PvP, I at least have some sort of basic idea of now how to tank, how to eat, how to do my overhead prayers, and maybe, just maybe, eventually I'll go into the wilderness, maybe when I'm ready or something. But I at least now have a spot to where I can kind of get a little more confident. I don't just have to walk into the wilderness, have no idea what I'm doing, flail about, and then die because I don't know what I'm doing, and then just vote no to PvP, right? Like I now have a spot to learn about.
I think like, and I have two avenues here that I'm thinking of when you were explaining all of that, like, and I'd love to address them. But like, so I agree. It's really hard. Like I have a peer that I just made on my, why not, just when I was like, at the height of my, I want to check out PvP. The issue is that like going into the wilderness, like reading about it, trying to figure out how to even find fights, what the proper etiquette is to fight, where to look for, how to do it, whether or not you should go to be bounty hunter or not. Like the if you're a new player to the entire thing, the thing I ended up running into is people saying just go PK bots. And not only is that super boring and like just really boring and obnoxious, but it's also just not really the kind of PvP that I think a lot of people might find really fun, which is against other players. But because the skill ceiling in OSRS is so insanely high, and it's not really translatable from any other game. You have to climb up that entire mountain to start competing with people that are already waiting for you up there, right? So like
Yep.
if you have a lot of money to spend, you're jumping in with tri-bidding, as an even mediocre player, you're going to get steamrolled on whatever the tri-bidding world is. I'm forgetting what it's called, or what number it is. But like, or pure, I don't know where pure is even PK at this point, apart from BH. But like, you
Like
chances
PvP
are
worlds.
PvP worlds, yeah, you might get steamrolled because the high chances are people are just going to blast you, just because of they've played longer, they have more skill in that regard. So that on ramp is really lacking. So the reason I say there's two avenues there is because to me, and these avenues I came up with when watching your original video about the topic of tutorializing PvP. And to even give some context really quickly is that my issue is that tutorials are often ignored. That's one of the main reasons why Tutorial Island was removed originally. I think Jagex said that the amount of players that paid attention, read it, processed it, and then just log off and never log back in after was like 70% or something crazy like that. So they tried to rework it to make it more integrated with the game. Now it kind of exists as like a point of nostalgia, but there are so many other avenues through which OSRS is tutorialized outside of Tutorial Island, right? Like there's so many different ways to get tutorialized in the game. And the same would apply to PvP in an even more complex way, where tutorializing PvP is challenging because it's not intuitive. Like explaining to someone why, a death dotting works and how to like mitigate that. Like, how do you do that outside of just doing a pop-up saying spam click them? Like that's such a very like bizarre solution because of the way the click system works. So you can
I do think, I do totally think that the deeper portions of the game are something that, let's take it from like the PVM side, right? Like someone like Port Kazard, maybe that is going way too deep, right? But someone like Port Kazard getting his quiver with no overhead prayers, there are so many different aspects to this game that people have, very few people have any idea about, right? That's like on the extreme end of like, how do I sit here and tank 300 damage, but I end up not dying because I stalled it and then I activated a like a P-neck, but I did it on a certain tick after my death should have absolutely, like I should have died, but the game didn't recognize that I died. And here's these 2 checks. How do I pass these 2 checks and then still survive 300 damage and not worry, about any of that, right? Like that's like the extreme end of it. But there's nothing in this game that is going to teach you something like that, right?
Yeah.
And like that could be the extreme example that for like the top 1%, less than 1% of people that are just ridiculously good at tri-bidding in this game, which not everyone is going to be. Someone like Odablock would be a good example of someone that would be like in that top 1% or smaller than 1%. He's going to understand like little aspects of PvP like that, right? But then you have a lot of other players who are very good at PVM, but obviously aren't anywhere near the level of Port Kazard, that they are something like a solo Chambers, for example, right? Like if you want to do methods like 3-0, so 3 hits on the mage hand to 0 hits back on you, or you want to do something like 4-0, 1-0, like 4-1, whatever it might be. There are obviously tutorials like on YouTube for that, right? But there's nothing in game that teaches you how to do that. That's just one of those things where it's like you kind of just learn as you go. That oh, people are able to do this without taking any damage. How? Oh, well, they do 4-0. They do 3-0. They do whatever. They do all these different mechanics, but none of that is in the actual game. But it's still very much a legitimate part of how you do something. Or how you do Chambers in like a very high level setting.
Yeah.
Right? And obviously you could take it even further with that, but just for argument's sake, a lot of PVMers are able to do that, but like I don't even know what the percentage would be. So I'm just throwing this number out there. Maybe this is incorrect, maybe it's more, maybe it's less, but like I would say like 20 or yeah, like probably like 20% of like PVMers that like have engaged in chambers can do that. Maybe that number is wrong, but no, it's not like the number is relevant. It's just to prove the point that like the majority of players that play this game are not going to understand, how to do that, right? But they're like something like Brutus or, Scurious or whatever, or all these other different bosses leading up to there, even Chambers itself. They're not going to teach you how to do it, but that doesn't mean that those aren't like quality mechanics in the game of how you min-max something, right? Of how you abuse it. So in that same regard, I do think that when people kind of think of like a tutorialization of PvP, I think that maybe they are thinking something more so along the lines of like a tutorial island as opposed to something more so like a Scurious, right? Where
Yeah.
Scurious, the whole point of it is to teach you, oh look, there's things that fall on me, and even though they're falling on me slowly, if I sit there and I don't move, I get hit by them, so I better click and move. And then it goes, okay, not only is that happening, but he's also shooting a ranged attack at me as well, right? And now I have to deal with the range attack, and I have to deal with moving. And then, oh, look at that, there's also little minions that spawn, like little rats. Now I have to deal with not just the boss, not just the overheads, or not just the falling objects, not just the overheads, but now the minions, and making sure that I don't just sit there and get destroyed by all three of those things, right? And obviously, it's Scurious, so it's going to be like a lot lower of a bar in terms of like what is going to really cause real problems for you. But if you just sit there and you ignore all the mechanics of Scurious and you just get hit, like you can get a kill like once. Yeah, sure. You can like bullshit your way through it, but eventually you're going to have to go bank, and eventually you're going to have to keep learning how to really engage with Scurious.
Yeah.
Right. And even though it's not that punishing. So that's what a tutorial of PvP could be. It could be like, it doesn't have to just sit there and be like this straightforward thing with an arrow saying, click under him. Look at that. He can't attack you back. It doesn't have to be all of that, right? It can just literally be as simple as, like there are different elements to the idea suggested is the proving grounds, just for argument's sake. Not even, you don't even have to necessarily sit there and think of the exact mini game I propose, but you could say, like there is like this mini game where it works in a wave based way, and the different waves are meant to sit there and teach you what the point of PvP is and the different aspects of PvP. And it doesn't even necessarily need to be that, it's the same thing every single time. It doesn't need to kind of be like an Inferno or like anything like that, or like a Jad fight pits sort of thing, or fight cave sort of thing. It can still just be as simple as, what do you want to learn? You go in, and then there is like a little like lesson in there for you. Here, you want to learn how to properly triply? Okay, this is how you do it. Here's a monster coming at you. Great. And now you're like, you know what? I feel like I'm good with that. I never need to do that again. Now you don't need to engage with that. That's just, one aspect that you could be taught. Then you can do like, here's your overheads. Let me teach you how to deal with your overheads. Right. And you're like, okay, I'm going to repeat that one 2 or 3 times because I really kind of didn't get that yet. Right. And I noticed that even though I thought I got my prayers correct, he actually hit me off prayer. So now I'm going to like sit there and practice. So it's like there's like these different little things that you can do. And maybe you only engage with them, I don't know, with all the different sections like 10 times at most. And then now I'm ready to actually do the real mini game itself that combines all of these things. And yes, maybe it is that ultimately at like the end of that mini game, it's it finishes off with like tri-breeding, but maybe it doesn't have to start with tri-breeding. Maybe it can just start with a simple, I have a melee weapon and I'm sitting there and fighting something else. But like, point being, I think when people think of tutorializing PvP, I think they sit there and think no one wants to sit through a tutorial, but realistically, it can just be that the tutorial would take place beforehand, or you can just say, I don't want to fricking sit there and deal with any of that. I'm going to go and play the mini game, right? I'm going to go play the Proving Grounds mini game. It's in a way, it's like a tutorial, but like I'm really sitting there and doing it for the rewards. Just kind of like what LMS is, even though it's obviously against other players. I'm sitting there and I am doing LMS for the rewards.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of where I see tutorializing PvP, as like how it fits into this game, because I think it really would fit.
Yeah, I think that's exactly where I'm at too. That was one of the avenues that I was definitely like leaning toward, or at least one of the avenues I was considering, where like finding a way to do like a PvP Scurious, right? Because I love Scurious. I think it genuinely is one of the best updates like that I've seen in the game since I started playing it. Just because I mean it got me into the PVM, and retrospectively, it's such an incredible boss fight for such like a low level requirement. Like I mean, compare that to other fights you do around that time, Dagonoth Kings, where you're safe spotting them the whole time. I mean, Scarius is just the bomb. The only thing it's missing is just like an actual fun, unique outside of the rat bone weapons. But regardless,
I agree. For the record, I do agree with that.
I really love Scarius, and finding a PVM way to integrate PvP mechanics in a cool manner, specifically, let's say like in like that arena concept where you're fighting different tiers of NPC enemies that are geared and operating like a regular player might, in a roundabout sense, not like one to one, where you would have to utilize PvP to kind of do certain things. So like if there's obstacles in the arena, and they're charging up a big AoE, and the only way to escape that AoE is by freezing them and then hiding behind one of the pillars. That teaches you how LOS works. That teaches you how how you could even consider logging out during that. Although you probably wouldn't. That probably wouldn't be a mechanic in the fight. But you know what I mean. Like it would teach you how LOS would work in PvP. That you can freeze someone, but also it would teach you that if you go too far, you break that freeze. What is it called? The freeze leash, like where you're too far away.
Yeah, and more or less. I've never actually heard the term for it, but yeah.
So you could do so much cool stuff, right? Like, or he charges up another AoE spell that was gonna fucking deal 80 damage to you, so you have to freeze them and then step under them to avoid it. That's the only way. The tile underneath them is the only one that's not affected. Like things like that, I think would teach PvP mechanics, and just framing it like a boss, like a boss gauntlet, right? Where the deeper you go, the more rewards you get. Having some uniques on the table that are kind of fun for early to mid game players. Some impactful stuff there. Maybe even a reward shop that can give you like stuff like a rune pouch or other QOL upgrades like an herb sack. Like things like that, I think would be really approachable, because if there was a boss in the game that would give you really cool stuff like a rune pouch, I think it would be super, super popular in the early and mid game. Like it would be like the immediate thing people do. And it would teach you, it would be like a PvP Scurious, as you pointed out, like with a Scurious tier encounter with PvP mechanics. And then you can go deeper into it, and then mechanics get more complicated. Maybe they're doing overheads now. Maybe they're swapping weapons, so you have to swap your overheads in response to those while still doing the preceding mechanics. It's a PvP fight with a variable difficulty, almost like an invocation system, that the higher level you go, maybe the better loot rewards are or whatever. And it's just framed like a PvP encounter or a PVM encounter that has PvP mechanics. I really like that idea. That's like the one avenue I was leaning toward. I'm like, that's because people love PVM, so why not combine the two? The second thing I was considering too is kind of like a more restricted and maybe this cannibalizes Bounty Hunter too much, so that could be a problem. But like one of the biggest gaps in PvP for me, as someone who did a lot of DMM stuff, so like I'm like, I would say I'm bad at PvP, but I'm like better than what I was before DMM after being in the pure bracket for many hours and doing PK. Like it was really fun killing people in the pure bracket. And like one of the biggest gaps there is like getting an account, setting it up, like, with all the gear, having enough gold, having enough risk, being able to like know what to bring in your inventory, how to even set up your inventory. Like all of that, and then even knowing who you're fighting and what they're risking, maybe they're hiding, like that whole like void between you getting good enough at something in like a limited time game mode and you actually experiencing it in the open world. It's a big gap. And I kind of like likes an idea where, imagine like an environment where you're fighting other players, but the idea is that you just put in like, let's say 100k gold. And that's like the minimum requirement, 50k gold. That's the minimum requirement. And then you're just given gear and items and a full setup. That's like a really low level, like free to play pure setup, like a very cheap one where you're only risking 50k. And that would be like a newbie entry point where the person you're fighting against is also going to only have that setup. And you guys can just practice getting KOs on each other with like, I don't know, like a Rune Warhammer or Rune Two-Handed Sword or whatever people use in free to play. Like, and then you can do a 150k bracket where it's like that, but like, with a bit more stuff going on, then a 500k, then a 2 mil, then a 5 mil. And it kind of operates like a bounty hunter system would, but it's very restricted and sets you up with all the items. So what you're risking is not those individual items because you're given to them, you're given them by the game. You're risking just the gold input like you would at the Rev Caves or the Wilderness, just at a higher bracket potentially. Does that make any sense?
I think in a perfect world, that's exactly how it would be set up for one of the different aspects of PvP. So kind of like how, again, we discussed, there's so many different like points to learn different, styles of PVM in RuneScape. And there's like, again, I'm a broken record at this point, but Brutus, Scurious, Royal Titans, up and up and up, blah, blah, blah. I think that would serve as one of like those perfect mini games in between of like so you have something like if you want a PK and let's say you want a PK but you don't know where to start, you do the tutorial thing that I talked about, or I got to stop calling it tutorial, the PvP mini game, the proving grounds, whatever, it teaches you. Yes, the onboarding mini game. Yeah. And you go and do it. You're like, well, why would I want to do that? There you go. I get some loot incentives. That's why I want to do it. Like, I'm going to get some items. I'm going to get my rune patch, whatever. And then you're like, okay, well, now I kind of have the basics, but I don't know where to start, from here. Like, or I don't know where to go from here, rather. Like, this is where I start. Where do I go from here? Then something, like exactly what you're saying. I think another mini game like that would be perfect, where it's like, you can make good money if you just sit there and like you're beating everyone as well, sure, whatever. But like, it kind of like it's like a 50K incentive at a time to like learn PvP, and that's probably what the Emir's arena should have been. By the way,
yes,
I was literally
gonna say that. I was like, that's exactly what Emir should have been. Yeah,
that's what it should have been. That's what it still should be. That's 100% where I think they, it should go in the future. And I really do think, because, and by the way, for the record, just kind of taking a step outside of this, I really like the way you think about this stuff. I really hope that you are able to talk to JMods and kind of get these points across, because I think you articulate it perfectly, right? Like I really like the way you think about like your approach to just game design in this game in general. And maybe maybe like the JMods could be like, well, it might not work in that sort of way or whatever, but it could work in this sort of way. I totally think though that Emir's arena would be the next step, and you can have all these different brackets or whatever, and you can even then have an elo system on that. And you're gonna deal with people that are like smurfing or whatever, but like that's just unfortunate reality in any game. But you know what? It's like if someone smurfs on you and they're smurfing on you for like 50K, you're like, okay, you're just a fucking moron then. Like, why are you sitting there wasting your time for 50K? Whatever. Like, yeah, that guy smoked me, but you know what? The next guy, the chances are that you run into smurfs multiple, matches in a row. It's just a low thing. It can happen. It's just a low thing, whatever. But like, then you go ahead.
No, all I was going to say there, just to add on to what you're saying, is that like, I think there's a really long, kind of annoying, for people that are very inexperienced like me, of like annoying process of like, okay, well, I have some gold. Now I have to buy all the gear. Now I have to get all my setup. Now I have to find someone who's of a similar level, item level. Jesus Christ, I've been playing too much WoW.
I know you're saying.
Yeah, similar, exactly like just similar bracket, quote unquote, as me, and make sure they're also not like, giga smurfing in their inventory with some crazy setup. Like, there's been situations where that's happened. Like, this would guarantee essentially a quote unquote even playing field where you could just kind of like, I'm bored, I have 50K to spend. And you just instantly find a game, right? Like you put in your gold and you're instantly matched with someone who's going to have the same setup as you. And like for crazy tri-britters out there who are there for the high risk PKs, this might not be for them. But like, I think this might put like that, it might bring back that era of time before I played where people were like in full rune with like a dragon simi in the wilderness, like by the wilderness ditch, right? Like, and just fighting each other. Like, the risk is low. Most people there aren't secretly hiding in AGS. And that's why more casual players might be okay with trying that. And because it's not a full tri-brid, there's not really a way to fully outskill someone else of just like, okay, well, he's going to be doing like the Michael Raxon, right? Like he's going to freeze crazy. the introduction is so, it's like a free to play setup essentially, and then you could build up from there. That would
Yeah,
be cool. I would love
totally.
that. Yeah.
I really do think that something, honestly, that should be something that gets discussed, like, again, with JMods, because I think something like that is really possible to potentially happen. Like, we're talking about realistic ideas, that's something that realistically could happen.
Yeah.
But, go ahead.
All I was going to say is that I want to, I think I mentioned this to you in DMs at some point. Shout out to Arc Raiders for giving me this idea, because it's an
Nice.
extraction game. So when you die, you lose all the shit, right? But that game has these like pre-packaged like starter setups that you get for free, and you can just go in there and start scavenging with a very minimal setup and just get your build going again. So you don't have to like spend 15 minutes in your like, user interface, like rebuilding everything and respending. You can just kind of go in, you can launch it up again, and it doesn't feel as bad. And I feel like having that same system in OSRS, even if it's just in a limited game mode like this, would remove some of that barrier. So you can continue now.
Yes, absolutely. So, again, like, I think, again, in a perfect world, you have, the something like, the starting point, like the proving grounds, learn PvP, right? Get rewarded for doing it, kind of like LMS does. Then you move on to something like this new updated Emir's arena, or you call it something else. I think it should be called something else. But then you would have something like, okay, now maybe I want to learn, or like I want to like try my hand in LMS, right? And you're like, okay, great. Now I feel like, good enough to take on like whatever, right? So, either the like Emir's arena or LMS would be like the on ramp to then go say, okay, you know what? I'm gonna go PK in PvP worlds. I've seen people do that at the GE. Maybe I do that. Or they're like, you know what? I'm gonna go PK and Bounty Hunter. I'm gonna go try my hand at that. Or then they're like, you know what? I feel confident enough to go PK in the wilderness. Or you know what? I don't even need a PK in the wilderness. I want to go make some money in the wilderness, and I now actually feel kind of confident enough that I can sit there and fight back against someone that is going to, try to kill me, because I can have like my little hidden stuff. It's not like Emir's arena anymore. I have like my hidden Void Waker. I have Avenge on me. I have a freeze if, I either have Avenge or like I have a freeze if I try to fight back and it's too much. I've now learned, from like that very basic beginning, mini game that teaches me how to PvP. I have now learned to catch a freeze and then run around a corner and sit there and wait to log out. I have now learned how to do that. So, I now feel a lot more confident because there's now a progression path of, I don't just have to start and have no idea what to do about going into the wilderness, and then I walked in and died. Screw it, I hate this game, whatever. I hate, the wilderness, I hate PvP. It's no longer like that. I now have, if I go into the wilderness right now and I go and die, that's on me, because there was, things like the Proving Grounds, there's things like Emir's Arena, there's things like Bounty Hunter that I can go to and learn. Just like if I were to sit there, and I haven't tried much PVM and I go and try a Chambers of Xeric, I'm going to just sit there and die over and over. Like I don't have to subject myself to that now, because at that point it's kind of on me if I go into the wilderness and I die and I get mad because like I didn't know the content yet, right? But like as of right now, if people go into the wilderness and die, it's not on them. It's like the game design of the wilderness is just brutal. There's nothing that taught them how to safely and reliably, deal with any of that. So I think something like this, if that were to be built out, obviously it would take a lot, but something like that getting built out, I think would help PvP out in such a crazy big way that it would actually, make people feel as though it's more accessible, and they could understand that PvP is not always just going to be you fighting the best guy. A lot of like these people aren't always that good. But all in all, it's really fun to get a PK on someone. It's really fun to loot, earn that like oh my god, I just got him for an AGS. That just freaking doubled my bank or whatever. Like something like that is so fun, and like I feel as though it's a shame that there's not the ability for people to kind of get to that point, because there's nothing in this game that really lets them get there. And I think a lot of what we've talked about so far would really help out a lot of players, not just the PCAN community, but like the community as a whole that is interested, because there is a good amount of players. I don't know the exact number, but it's I forget exactly where I've heard this, but like I do know that this is something that has been thrown around, that like at least a quarter of the players in this game that don't PK do have some level of interest in the idea of it, but they don't know where to start. That's what I've
No,
heard.
that's exactly where I'm at. Like 100%. So I definitely could see that. I'll also add that like in this like limited, I don't want to call it staking because that's actually a bad connotation at this point, but like this limited time, like PvP, not limited time, limited scope PvP minigame that we're talking about it with Emir's Arena, this rework. I would also like the idea of like, because it's so limited, right? It wouldn't go up to 500 billion, whatever, right? We don't want to give that like leeway to just return like, staking or whatever. But it could just hit a hard cap at like 15, 20 mil, whatever it may be, with like the crazy high risk tribird setups, I guess you could say. Like it would be really cool if also Iron Men could just get the rewards from the PK just right to the Death Scoffer. Maybe there's a
Yep, would
limit to
love
that, but that would be a very cool way to get Iron Man invested in it too. Just like, oh, I want 50k my Death Scoffer. I'll go to this mini game. Maybe you need a certain total level to enter it, and then like, okay, I got that 50k PK. Boom, I get my 50k back. That 50k goes in Death Scoffer. Now I'm chilling for a little bit. Like that stuff like that would be kind of cool. I don't think it's game breaking or anything. I don't think it breaks the idea of an Iron Man. It would also be randomized in regard to who you match, so it's not like a easy to gimmick kind of thing where you can easily just sell your gold or whatever to Iron Man. And the final thing would be Death's Coffer. And finally, on top of that, it would be a specific world, so big enough populace where you can't like game it. But yeah, that'd be really cool. I would definitely love to speak to JMod about that. Maybe Mod Mank can let us know what he thinks about it. I know we're running up
great.
on our 2-hour mark right now. So I want to say,
I mean, I still have time. I still have time to
perfect.
Talk, yeah.
So because I did want to touch on just really quick DMM. I did want to hear your thoughts on the recent DMM. I have a lot of thoughts on the recent DMM. I didn't want to make a video about it because then I have to use my PK footage, and no one wants to see that. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I liked it. To be fair, I was meant to play a lot more. Like I was gonna play for probably like at least a week. I didn't really see myself playing the full 2 weeks. Long story short, I have massive Deadman fatigue because I don't know how much you know about like how Deadman used to be, but there used to be a seasonal every 3 months, and it would run for the entirety of those 3 months, and it was kind of like basically Deadman mode all year round, all the time, and like it was like kind of the thing to do back in the day for views, but I hated it so much. It was like one of those things where it's like you're kind of always on edge because you could be attacked at any moment, and then you could lose your skills, and you could lose your bank. Eventually it wasn't your skills, but you could still lose like 28 items in your bank, and then they reduced it like the 10 most valuable things and everything. But I basically was playing Deadman mode all the time, and I burnt out of it so hard that I stopped touching Deadman mode. I think it was for like 4 years at that point. Like I would not touch any version of Deadman mode. And then I played last time around for a little bit. I had a good time. I think I played for like a week or so during that. Maybe like 2 weeks. This time around, I really like what they did with making it a lot more accessible. I don't. I would honestly say I did not play enough to sit here and discuss the balancing of it in terms of like what I think is the correct balancing of like the gear and all that overall. But I thought it was a lot more of the BS cut out of Deadman mode, and it was a lot more just about like PvP. So like I do think that as far as Deadman goes, this was the most successful one in terms of the formula.
Yeah. I mean, I can only speak from this one as someone who was interested in checking it out because I obviously like PvP and I want to find an outlet to express that. and this was a good opportunity to do that. And I think they did a lot of great things. Like I think removing bank keys is like single-handedly why I felt committed to checking it out for more than like a day or two, because
Yeah, I
bank keys
love
just
that. I
sound
love that
miserable
aspect.
to me. So I really like that because I felt like much more confident taking fights even at a disadvantage and just risking a bit more as a result of that. Like that was a great idea. There's obviously issues. I think one of my biggest criticisms of it was that like I get why they try to leaguify a lot of the skilling portions of it, but my God, like if there's ever an easy way to do the exact same dynamic you have right now in the wilderness where people just want to skill and you're ganking them and they get annoyed even though they signed up for this game mode just because they want you know what I mean? That's that weird thing where you get that predator prey dynamic again in the limited time game mode, which in some ways that's on them, but in other ways like Jagex kind of created that environment to begin with by like leaguifying the skilling portions of it. I would love
Yep.
to see if like the next Deadman mode, I would love to see the experience rates not just be increased, but rather increased proportional to how far you are away from a safe zone. So it really incentivizes people to risk a lot by going as by not just being able to chop logs AFK the entire Deadman mode. Like I don't know if that's necessarily what Deadman should be about. I don't know, and I'd love to hear your thoughts as someone who has played Deadman a lot, even if it wasn't this one. Like, I think one of my biggest criticisms of Deadman is actually the first like hour or two, where it feels like disproportionately weighed toward people who not only have experience and have pre-existing like communities that might give them gold or have pre-existing strategies, but like if you fall behind in that first hour, it feels like miserable. Like that's what happened to me and my buddy who were checking it out. Like we fell behind in that first hour, and the second we started getting PK'd or whatever, before we got like kind of got caught up with everyone else, it was like miserable. Like you were just like, oh, you were ready to stop. And I wish there was maybe a way, and I don't know how to do this, but a way to kind of like create a prep zone in DMM and then allow people to like exit that prep zone. Like maybe that like the safe zones have like a cap of like a level 20 or level 30 in their skills, but you can train your skills in those safe zones and then finally getting pushed out of them. Like I don't know how to do it, but what are your thoughts on like that like rush of like that first hour? Because there are many positives to it as well, right?
I kind of like I like what you're saying. I think they should definitely do some sort of like you have the ability to train safely up to a certain point in certain zones, and you can even take it a step further and make it so like a lot of Lumbridge, if not like all of Lumbridge, is in a safe zone, right? So like you can sit there and spend all your starting time in that safe zone. You have fishing right there. You have something like Brutus or like cows that you can train on. You can get like maybe and I would even say have like a cap of like level 50 or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And it is like mainly just like in like the first bracket or whatever. Like just make it so you are able to only train to like level 50 and everything. And if you want to sit there and spend all your time in like the safe zone, you can, but it doesn't get good until you leave the safe zone. That's why it's like if all you're doing is just spending your time in those safe zones, you're not going to get that far. So I kind of already think that there is that sort of incentive built in anyway to leave the safe zone. But you're right, like that first hour really does kind of blow. So maybe making it so all of Lumbridge is safe and it can really kind of just serve as much more of like I hate to use the word again, but like a tutorial
Tutorial, yeah,
zone.
yeah. No,
Yeah, I'm
I
like,
completely agree. Getting like your starter like sigil choices and like not feeling so pressured to like keep up with guides and all this kind of stuff. Because like I would like to see an environment where people go in without just like following someone's DMM guide of the first hour, and if you fall behind, it feels like I would love to see if that first zone is just more chill of like people getting their footing in it. I think I would guess the vast majority of players at DMM fell off in the first like in that first like hour or two. I would guess, but maybe I'm wrong. But like at least like so many players probably just got immediately overwhelmed by that first hour. And it's not a fun first hour like in leagues where if you get overwhelmed, you can just slow down. In DMM, you can't. You start getting ganked and like obliterated, right?
yep.
So
Yeah,
it's just
you're right. You're right.
this really weird situation. Most of the time in DMM, I spent there was in Varlamore where everyone thieves those guys fully AFK. That was how I got my like starting gold. Is I just killed those like people thieving, usually just for their alts or something like that. And then I found a lot of people where they're PKing. So when I got geared up, I was like, okay, I'm not killing the people thieving anymore. I'm going to start killing the people PKing the people thieving. And that's how I mostly just did in like the first like 1 to 60 pure bracket. I thought that was really fun. I overall just really like pure PKing for some reason. Like it's easier.
It's great.
A bit more,
it's fun.
Yeah, I like how bursty it is because it feels like you can just completely 1-0 someone. Like if you just get a good like it's fun. Like so, and it's more obviously much more easy to get into. So I overall thought it was successful in that like I actually did PvP, and I would love to see what they do in future DMMs. Maybe next year they do another one, and like I would love to see that grow. Less so in like the league's direction, and more so in like the rewarding people for actually doing PvP. Like, I don't know if you have an opinion on this, but like not giving like the whatever DMM points for killing people is crazy to me. Like, I get why. Like,
I agree,
but like
you could boost it, but like,
yeah,
I do agree, and that there is a way to make it so you can do that because it is the PvP game mode. You should get rewarded for killing other people. But like all in all, like maybe I don't know. I think there is a way to balance that, but I understand the easiest way to do it is to just balance it around everything but PvP. I do understand that from like the design perspective, but it feels silly. You're totally right on that.
yeah, because I want to spend more time killing people for the points. I don't want to have to grind skills only to then get into PvP and then find out I don't like PvP and then I feel like I wasted my time. Like I rather just like get into that. And I think that's nice. Like I mean, I really liked it. I fucked up my first pure in that I accidentally over leveled to 61 because I miscalculated my levels. It was really embarrassing. And then I just got it. I literally just did it all again on a second account because I was enjoying it so much. So shout out to the DMM designers there because I think they did a great job, but I'm very excited to see what happens there. Beyond that, do you have any like parting words for PvP? Like if I always ask this question, not about PvP, but just in general. If you were like, let's say God, old school RuneScape God for a moment, where you could snap your fingers and bring something into the game, not like a I wish the wilderness was alive again kind of wish, but like an actual update to something.
Yeah, I understand. I understand what you're saying.
What would it be and why?
I mean, admittedly, after having this conversation, I kind of like you really kind of steered me towards having there be a built-out progression system, and I kind of always thought this before, but like you really kind of put it in a much more material way for me. Like you made it a lot more real for me, where I would really hope that there would be something where you have that beginning game like we talked about, then you have the mini game you suggested where you just get matchups with an elo system against people, and you're just sitting there and doing it to earn like that 50K reward, so you can sit there and make a little bit of money fighting actual real other players. And then you have the other game modes like LMS and Bounty Hunter, and you have the wilderness, and then you have different bosses where people that are inside or people that don't want to engage in the wilderness would not have to engage with the wilderness. There would be bosses outside of it that offer those same rewards, but within, and I guess technically speaking, if I got exactly what I wanted, I wouldn't really want it that way, but because I feel like that's a compromising way that like Void Waker would just stay. But like I really love the idea again of having all that and then having other bosses, something like a Wrathmaw or a new boss or whatever, not what Wrathmaw was, but just kind of trying to put a face to a name. Having some sort of boss that brings rewards from outside into the wilderness, right? Exactly like you said, like the nightmare staff, the orbs or whatever. And then if something like that was successful and people did like it, eventually doing that maybe with some other items that kind of don't make sense where they currently are, type of thing. So that would be what I would hope to have come into this game. And I would really only want to do it if everyone would kind of be like on board with that sort of thing. I would never just, if I was RuneScape God for a day, just put it into the game just to put it into the game because I think that's what's best. Because I'm not even going to sit here and pretend like I know what's best. I would like to think that what I'm saying is pretty informed, based on years and years of playing this game. Hearing why people don't like PvP and why, and how you can take that and still work with it to where people that do like PvP and do like, having that risk versus reward aspect of going into the wilderness, how you can, appeal to them and to make it so other people don't have to, you know, partake in these systems. I really do think that is just the best way forward. And I feel as though after thinking about it for a very long time, that I maybe do have a good, idea about what should come into the game. But again, maybe I don't. I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, I mean that's a good answer. I think like it's a host of different things to get people a bit more like amicable to the idea. I like the fact that the wilderness as a riskier yet faster outlet for certain things, not everything, but certain things, whether it be certain supplies or certain uniques. That's a cool avenue to explore that has not been explored. Like it's retroactively something that's kind of what happens with the dragon pickaxe. But like the problem there to me is that like no one does the Calphite Queen willingly, so no one's really grinding the Calphite Queen for the dragon pickaxe. But like if it's on like a decent boss and then gets transposed onto a great wilderness fight, like some of the new ones like Calvarion to me are great wilderness bosses, even if they're very easy, very well designed and intuitive, understandable. Like I love them as mid game encounters or early game encounters. So like having that option of like an easier wilderness boss with maybe a better drop rate, but with that huge risk of now you have to fend off other players that are gunning after that loot is a interesting proposition that doesn't really exist for the Void Waker right now, because and I feel like that's maybe why people are so averse to it in the wilderness, is because like there is no alternative. And in a game that's very alternative driven with how you pursue certain goals, I feel like it would be a great avenue to explore for the wilderness. 100%. I definitely agree with that.
Dude, thank you for having me on.
Yeah, no, listen, it was a great conversation. I think I like it that we didn't just talk about problems. We got into some solutions, which was awesome. And I think that is gonna be a very interesting listen. Thank you so much for coming on, man.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really am interested to hear what people have to say about all this.